Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. All right, man. So I appreciate you guys stopping by. So as you guys do know, we are in the World Championships, and it's actually looking kind of grim for Jan Nepomniachtchi. He basically, if I'm not mistaken, is going to have to win the next 4 games straight. Like, he can't draw, he can't lose. If he loses one more game or draws another game, I believe Magnus Carlsen is just the world champion again. But as I said before, and as I always say in my videos, if you want to skip all the intro stuff and get right to the analysis, the full analysis, I do have the timestamp for that at the very top. But as I said in my previous video, I'm going to be working on doing what I call a full analysis of a game and a light analysis. So once I do finish that video, I will be including the link to that video in this description. So you might not see it when you first watch it, but it will be updated very shortly after. So that way, if you do want a minimized version of the full analysis, you can watch that video as well. It should be probably 4 or 5 minutes shorter. I'm not sure. I haven't done it yet, but I have like all of this stuff written out that I'm going to be basically like trimming, out of the video. I'm trying to make it more concise and just more straight to the point and not loaded with a lot of stuff. So, for those of you out there, who do want a real short, just kind of like, summary video, that should be good for you. For anybody else that wants like above and beyond everything, these are more the videos for you, the full analysis. So, getting to it though, I do have my people that are coming from the Philippines as always. So I will say mabuhay to you. Kumusta na aking makaibigan? Masaya ko makita kang muli. Maraming salamat po sa nanonood ng aking mga video. Mabuting pagbati ingat lagi. And I did have kapayapaan sa inyo. So that is the phrase that I did come up with to say. I'm trying to say peace to you, but then I was also told that Samaño and Kapayapaan is another way to say it. Is slightly different, and it means more peace be with you. So that is what I'm trying to say, and I think for all of my people from the Philippines, you kind of know what I mean. But I appreciate you guys very much. Anybody who is coming from Russia, I will say dobre otra, kakadela, spasibo for coming by and taking a look at my video. Anybody who is coming from Norway, I will say God morgen to you, tusen tak. And I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. But if you guys are ready to go, let's go ahead and take a look at this game. So we got C4. We have E6. This transposes into many different things. So, I mean, it can be like Queen's Gambit declines. It can be Catalans. I mean, it can even get to the Nimzo Indian, like, Bogo Indian type stuff. So there are many different openings that you can get to from this. I mean, I'm a D4 player myself. So, I mean, this is, if D4 is played here, that's kind of like going D4, E6, and then C4, so that's how that rolls. So we do have G3. We do have D5. We have Bishop to G2 in this game. We have D4. And this is a pretty beneficial move. You are moving the pawn a second time, but you're doing a very good thing with making sure this knight can't come to its like most desirable square. Of course, you can always go knight B to D2, which isn't bad. You just kind of have to, get your bishop into play. And then we do have knight to F3. Now, backing up, like I was saying before, after we do see D5, you do have the ability to go D4 here, and then maybe see something like knight to F6, and then bishop to G2, bishop coming to E7, we got knight to F3, castles, and as you guys can see, this is a Catalan. So, I mean, I'm a D4 player myself, and I love playing the Catalan. I do very well with the Catalan, and so, I mean, for me, this is a Catalan, but it would just be coming from a different move order. So, something I will say about these transpositions, man, if you can master transpositions, you will make your life so much easier as far as studying openings are concerned. That's when you get to another level, right? But backing up, like I said, we did have this position here where we got to knight to F3, and then knight did come to C6. We see castles by white. Bishop comes to c5. We see d3. We don't really want the pawn to come here and kind of mess our structure up at all. So we do push d3 to keep, you know, a little pawn chain rolling. Knight comes to f6. We see knight b to d2. We got a5. You know, just trying to make sure that we don't have any a3, b4 type stuff, because that is definitely very desirable when you have these pieces that are just on beautiful squares. You know, a3 and b4 just really just starts to disrupt them. And then maybe you can get a b5 and stuff like that in. So black is just making sure that they take care of that from jump. So we got knight to b3, which does attack this bishop here. So the bishop has a decision to make, and we see it going back to e7. And this is actually the novelty of the game. Let me adjust it just a touch. Okay, this is actually the novelty of the game. It makes a lot of sense because, I mean, you know, you don't really too much want to go b6 because once the knight does take, you are looking at some very, very ugly pawns. And you do have this diagonal super open for this bishop. So that's not too desirable. So the bishop, like I said, comes back to e7. We see e3. Pawn takes e3. Bishop takes e3. We do have knight to g4. And you know, Jan just doesn't really want to trade off that bishop. So he goes bishop to c5. But it is actually legitimate for you to just leave the bishop there. It's not, you know, like you're really going to be giving away such a great piece for a bad piece. And you have to think about what you might get if you had a situation where the knight did take. So let's say, for example, you play like d4 or something like that, right? You know, after the knight takes here, you would be taking back with this f-pawn. And as you guys can see, you have given up a bishop, but you do have this really nice open f-file. You know, and, you know, you are hitting this very tender f7 point. So, you know, you kind of got something for giving something. So that's whenever you're making the decisions, you do have to kind of think, you know, when you're giving something, like what are you getting in possibly in return? And every single different capture is a different situation. So you got to be, you know, mindful of that. So like I said, we did see bishop up to c5, just avoiding all of that. We got castles by black. We got d4. A4 comes, and this is a little bit of an inconvenience on this knight, so you have to kind of, you know, make a decision. You don't really want to just retreat the knight because then the bishop is going to be taken, and then you have your own set of double pawns. So we do see bishop taking e7 first, and then queen taking e7, and then we do have knight up to c5, and then we do have a3, which is a little bit annoying because it does cause you to make like a pretty critical decision at this point in the game. And so, like, what are you going to do here? I mean, taking with the pawn is what we see Jan Nepomniachtchi do, which is actually, like, one of the best things that you can do. You do have b4 as well. It gets kind of murky there. But you definitely don't really have anything like b3 because after rook to d8, you know, you are kind of in, you know, a little bit of trouble here with this pawn. You got to try to figure out how to you know, protect that. And you don't have the ability to bring the knight back to b3 now, because you've just moved this pawn. So it kind of causes a little bit of problems. You're trying to hold on to this pawn. So, like I said, we did see a3, pawn took a3, and then we see rook to d8 anyway. But then, you know, we do have the ability to come back with the knight to b3. We got knight back to f6. Rook comes over to e1. And then we see queen taking a3. And this is getting your pawn back. So everything and it's even. Both players pretty much have the same exact pieces. You know, white might just be a little bit better as far as their structure, but I mean, it's still triple zeros. We do see queen up to e2. We got h6. So both players are just making sure they create luft. They're making sure that they try to restrict each other's pieces, because when you start to get into the middle game like this, you start to try to, like, slow down or stop the progress of your opponent, unless you have like some crazy tactics that you can employ. But after we see queen to e2, we do see h6, and then we got h4. We're just, you know, we're preventing the knight from being able to jump in and cause any type of problems. You know, h4 is preventing g5. You know, g5 can come and g4 can come, trying to knock this knight away type deal. So, you know, we're just playing some prophylactic chess. So the bishop does come to d7. We see knight to e5. Bishop comes back to e8. Queen comes up to e3. We got queen over to b4. We have rook e to b1. And, I mean, it's kind of one of those situations I was talking about before. I mean, you don't really have any good discoveries going on right now. I mean, you know, there's not really anywhere that you can move the knight that's going to be pretty explosive. So, I mean, black is actually doing okay, even though they are opposite this rook with their queen. So the knight does take on e5. We see pawn taking e5, knight down to g4, kind of hitting the queen a little bit. So the queen does come down to e1. We see queen taking e1, rook taking e1. We do have h5, and this is, you know, kind of trying to solidify this knight here in black side of the board, or white side of the board a little bit. The bishop does take on b7. So this does allow a pawn to be snapped off the board. So for the moment, white is up an entire pawn. But I mean, you guys guessed it. It still says triple zeros, even being up an entire pawn. So some positions are just like that. So we do see rook down to a4, and this is trying to attack the under-defended pawn here on c4. So we have reached a point in the game that if you do want to pause the video and see what white should play in this position, go ahead and do so. Okay, cool. So this unfortunately wasn't what was played in the game. Nepomniachtchi blundered in this exact position. And I will get to that in a second. But what you want to play in this position is actually f3. And this is just a really nice move because, as you can see, the knight only has one square to go to. You know, it doesn't have like all of these different squares it can go to. Even though you technically can move it there, you're just going to lose the knight. So you're not going to do that. So you'd be seeing it go back to h6, and then you can just pull your bishop back to e4. And I mean, you're just good to go. I mean, you know, white isn't in like a super great position, but I mean, you know, they're still doing all right. You know, everything is good. And they do have this completely passed pawn over here. So, I mean, that's a little something. But after we see rook to a4 in the game, I'm not really sure what was going on, but Nepomniachtchi decides to save his pawn instead of his bishop. So he actually goes c5, which is a horrible, like pretty much game-ending blunder. And so this bishop is actually about to be trapped now after we see Magnus Carlsen play c6. And as you guys can see, this bishop doesn't really have anywhere to go. Once the rooks start to attack, which is what you see in the game, there just is no escape for this bishop. And there's no way to defend it either. So after you see f3, which gives the rook a support square on e4, it still doesn't matter because the knight comes back to h6 and we see rook to e4, and then the rook just retreats back to a7 with the tempo on the bishop. And as I said before, the bishop has nowhere to go. So even after rook to b4, you see rook over to b8, and the bishop is bye-bye. There is no way that you can win, that you can survive this bishop. I mean, you could have possibly just taken a pawn here and at least taken a pawn while you were at it, but I mean, that's just not how they went. So like I said, after we see rook to e4, of course you are dreaming that black is going to be like, you know what, I don't like a bishop. I'm just going to trade here and then trade here, and then now we're dead even again. But Magnus Carlsen, like I said, did not do that. He went ahead and surrounded, oops, I went too far. He went ahead and surrounded the bishop, and there was really nothing for Nepomniachtchi to do. So we see a4. The rook a takes on b7. We see rook up to b6. I mean, thinking that, you know, it might be a little bit better to go rook to b6. I mean, it's a little bit better to just trade on b7, but I mean, there really is nothing that's that great when you've lost an entire piece. So after we see rook to b6, of course, rook takes b6, pawn takes b6, rook takes b6. We see knight up to c5 because our knight was hanging. We see knight down to f5. And this is causing a little bit of problems because it is targeting some of these pawns in white's camp. We do have a5, you know, trying to throw a little tempo down on there. Maybe, you know, black might fall asleep and, you know, forget that they need to protect this passed pawn and do something that loses the game. But this is the world champion right here we're talking about. Rook does come back to b8. We see a6. Like, you have to try to do something, man. Like, just sitting there and losing, I mean, is not the best thing to do. So you have to try to fight and try to create some type of something, man. So the knight does take on g3. We see knight down to a4. We got c5. We got a7. Rook goes over to d8. We see knight taking c5. And then we see rook to a8. And it is actually in this position that Nepomniachtchi does resign the game. And I mean, I think it's pretty obvious why. I mean, you're just down an entire piece. And I mean, black is going to find a way to get this pawn on a7. And I have a variation that I can show you that pretty much kind of gets you that. There's many different ways that you can go about doing it. You know, you have the ability of like tempi, and you have the ability to kind of maneuver your pieces in this type of position and kind of get to where you can just kind of corral this pawn up. But to just kind of show you guys a sample of what can happen, this king on black side can literally just walk across the board and grab this pawn, because this rook is pretty tied down to trying to make sure that this pawn doesn't drop. So, I mean, the king is pretty free to move. So if we just kind of show that type of variation, after we see, let's say, maybe something like rook to a6, we would see king to f8. King would come up to f2, attacking the knight. The knight would come back to f5. And like I said before, it's attacking these weak pawns that are in white's camp. The knight would come down to e4. We'd see king to e7. Knight would come down to g3, you know, hoping to get a trade rolling, but it's not really going to matter. The king would step back to d8. Knight would take on f5. Pawn take f5. King up to e3. King over to c7. We would see e6, trying to drum up some counterplay. The bishop would come down to b5, attacking the rook. Rook down to a1. Pawn taking e6. King to f4. King to b6. And like I said, this king literally just walked across the board, and he is about to win this pawn fairly soon. So that is that game. So that was game 9. So they're playing 14 total games. So they just got done playing game 10 actually earlier. I'm a little bit late. So they will be playing the next 4, the last 4 games. And as long as Magnus Carlsen is holding the form that he showed this entire World Championships, he will be world champion once again. So yes, that is that game. Like I said, I'm a little bit late, so I think a lot of you guys have kind of already seen the games and stuff by now. I've just been incredibly busy, and I've had a lot going on over here, so I haven't really been able to keep up with stuff like I would like. So I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Maraming salamat, aking makaibigan, posa na nunood ng aking mga video. Tusen tak to everybody coming from Norway. And I appreciate anybody else from around the world coming by. And I will see you guys next time.